Welcome, everyone. Are you ready, Brandy? I'm Dita Seed with the Center for Biological Diversity, and we're here today because at 12:30 we expect the Utah Inland Port Authority to rubber stamp reapproval of 11 project areas that were illegally created, and they will still be illegal after today. They're going to be passing 22 resolutions to rubber stamp these illegal project areas that constitute 1.1 billion of potential taxpayer expenditures to fast-track industrial development. These project areas have lots of community impacts to traffic, water, air, and wetlands, and this is an entirely rushed process. So we've been circulating a letter to the Utah Inland Port that's addressed to the Utah Inland Port Authority Board and the legislature describing our concerns. And as of this morning, we have over 400 signatures on this letter. We're going to be delivering copies of the letter at the Port Authority Board meeting today. So now let's hear from our four speakers. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Brian Moench. He's the board chair of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment.
Thank you, Dita. I'm Dr. Brian Moench, president of Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, one of the largest civic organizations of healthcare professionals in the western United States. We are dedicated to protecting public health by protecting the public from environmental degradation. Utahns don't want our highways jammed with hundreds of thousands more semi-trucks. They don't want to breathe diesel exhaust everywhere they go. They don't want our wetlands to be turned into seas of asphalt. They don't want the Great Salt Lake turned into a toxic dust bowl. They don't want the Wasatch Front turned into a gigantic warehouse farm. And all that means they don't want what the Utah Inland Port Authority is selling. Just like no one elected Elon Musk to dictate the future of the United States, no one elected the Utah Inland Port Authority to dictate the future of the state of Utah. Just days ago, Senate Bill 239 was passed to require that 3 of the 5 UPHE board members be appointed by the governor. Almost certainly, this is in response to a lawsuit brought by the Center for Biological Diversity and Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, which challenged the legislature's 3 appointments to the board as unconstitutional because it allowed the legislature to encroach on the constitutional function of the executive branch. The statute and board restructuring now required via that bill amounts to an admission by the state that the prior board structure did violate the Utah Constitution, defying public accountability. But the new board structure remains unconstitutional by allowing 2 members of the legislature who are not accountable to the majority of Utahns to continue to appoint and remove UPHE board members. In point of fact, as a result of this new bill, the actual UPHE board members did not change. All they did was declare that one appointee, Jonathan Friedman, was switched from a legislative appointee to a governor appointee, but it's still the same person. But this change in the board structure is not just a meaningless cosmetic makeover, as the legislature and UPHE seem to think. The new board is rushing to paper over 11 legally defective projects authorized by the prior board by rubber stamping project areas rather than actually considering the consistent taxpayer and local community opposition. From the minute the first port bill was passed in 2018, public opposition has been intense. The only poll ever taken showed a majority of the public didn't want it. There's a reason early board meetings were disrupted by repeated episodes of civil disobedience until the pandemic hit and changed public meetings. The public didn't want what UPHE was selling then, and they don't want what it's selling now. UPHE's board continues to prioritize the interest of developers looking for public subsidy and not protecting the public's interest. Indeed, the board's decision to hold this meeting at the state capitol, rather than at communities where project areas are located, deprives many Utahns who are most directly impacted by these projects of the ability to attend and voice their concerns. The impetus for these projects is proclaimed by UPHE to come from local communities, when in fact the evidence is that it repeatedly comes from developers privately selling county commissioners their grand scheme, knowing UPHE's infrastructure provides them with essentially free money. And the end result in almost every case has been an unwelcome, total surprise to local residents. The board's decisions have enormous consequences on local communities, and the cumulative industrialization affects the entire state. Our quality of life through increased traffic, especially diesel trucks, more air pollution, environmental degradation, and depletion of water resources. And by the way, UPHE needs to stop telling the story that their projects will actually improve Utah air quality unless they can actually show us that evidence, because that evidence doesn't exist in the universe of reality, science, and facts. That claim is preposterous. Here's what UPHE should do instead of what they are doing. Rescind all 11 illegal project areas. Engage in a comprehensive analysis of the community and environmental impacts of these fast-track, taxpayer-subsidized industrial developments, including a traffic study, which they have promised for the last 4 years and still haven't done, and water resource analysis for each project area with opportunities for public review and comment. And finally, they need to hold public meetings and hearings in each affected community before approving any project areas. If Utah is an actual democracy, our landscapes, air quality, and economy should not be at the mercy of corporate developers. The public should have a say. But with UPHE, they have been shut out, and no resident, no voter, no Utah citizen should tolerate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next, we're going to hear from Joan Gregory, who is a leader with the Stop the Polluting Port Coalition and our communications improvement team.
Thank you, Dita. So I care deeply, not only about fair, open, and transparent government, but also about our entire Great Salt Lake ecosystem. 8 days ago, on a very quick timeline, Senate Bill 239 was enacted to require that 3 out of 5 UPHE board members be appointed by the governor, presumably in response to a lawsuit brought by the Center for Biological Diversity and Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, challenging the legislature's 3 appointments to the board as unconstitutional. Over the past 2 years, we have witnessed the approval of 11 new Utah Inland Port Authority project areas spread throughout Utah in 13 counties, encompassing over 76,000 acres, within which UPHE plans to subsidize industrial development at a cost of $1.1 billion taxpayer dollars. During that time, we struggled to get information about what was planned for each project area, having to resort to GRAMA, Government Records Act requests, to get that information. All of this is in addition to recent changes in the Inland Port Authority's public comment rules and practices. curtailing public comments during meetings, making the process more confusing, and holding meetings in locations far from the impacted communities. Today, March 11th, the board is planning to reapprove those 11 illegally created inland port project areas, rushing to rubber stamp these illegally defective project areas authorized by the prior illegal board, rather than considering the consistent taxpayer and local community opposition to these plans. The meeting agenda allocates a mere 30 minutes to the reapprovals, which is way too little time to hear and consider public input about matters of critical public concern. Holding one meeting at the state capitol rather than meeting in each of the communities where project areas are located is depriving many Utahns who are most directly impacted by these project areas the ability to attend and voice their concerns. This is yet another example of the legislature and the Inland Port Authority being unwilling to listen to public concerns in favor of giving large taxpayer subsidies to private developers. This is a big deal for taxpayers, and we, the taxpayers, should have full and complete information about the consequences of this UPHE fast-tracked industrial development in these communities. These 11 poorly vetted project areas were often complete and unwelcome surprises to local residents upon creation due to the perfunctory and opaque way that UPHE communicates with the affected communities and the lack of meaningful opportunity for public comment and due consideration. Yet the board's decisions have enormous consequences on those local communities and will negatively impact their quality of life through increased traffic, pollution, and depletion and degradation of water resources. This is also about access and timing. This information needs to be shared in a way and in sufficient time for the people in the community to be able to evaluate it. This has not been the case in the past, and it's definitely not the case today with this rushed reapproval. Further, Senate Bill 239 allows UPHE to withhold from the public information about business proposals in project areas. This means what little information the public was previously able to obtain through GRAMA will no longer be possible. This is a pattern of being opaque, not transparent, playing dangerous games with the future of Utahns and the precious ecosystem which sustains us.
Thank you, Joan. Next, we're going to hear from Teri Durfee. Teri is, as she'll tell you, a lifelong resident of Tooele County, but more importantly, she's a leader with Stop the Polluting Port and focuses on Tooele County issues. Come on up, Teri. Okay, my name is Teri Durfee, and I am a lifelong resident of Tooele County. I am here today because once again our legislature is obfuscating the issues surrounding the Utah Inland Port Authority. Senator Jerry Stevenson sponsored a bill passed in this last session in an attempt to get around a lawsuit regarding the separation of powers with the Utah Inland Port Authority Board. As no coincidence, Senator Jerry Stevenson is conveniently on the Utah Inland Port Authority Board. However, instead of fundamentally changing the board makeup to properly demonstrate separation of powers, the board is essentially unchanged, except maybe one minor member being changed from the legislature to the governor's pick. The legislature continues to take advantage of taxpayers by utilizing the Utah Inland Port Authority to help fund private development, where developers are the beneficiaries at taxpayer expense. The Utah Inland Port Authority is having a board meeting today to readopt all of the current Port Authority project areas in a sham process based off of their so-called new board. These project areas are set to spend around $1.1 billion. Even with our recent storms, we are far below where we need to be in terms of water for the state. The Great Salt Lake has still not even come close to recovering from so many years of drought. Spending such a significant amount of money to develop areas, including wetlands, that would take away more of our precious and finite water supply is extremely irresponsible and short-sighted. The claim being these areas would be developed anyway, but just sped up in order to benefit the economy doesn't seem to hold water. It is not true that many of these places would be developed privately anyway. Some of these areas including the Tooele County sites, such as the Tooele Valley project area, are in areas difficult to develop due to wetlands being present and the lack of utilities to those areas. If it was such a good idea to develop those areas, they probably would already be developing it privately and not impacting taxpayers negatively. The Utah Inland Port Authority Board recently purchased the North Temple landfill for approximately $20 million, and that does not include the cost of remediation. The Trust Lands Administration and Ninigret already had a plan to remediate it using private funding resources. There was a plan to remediate areas to fund the next phase. They were going to sell the areas that they had already remediated to fund the next phase of the process. But the Utah Inland Port Authority decided to complicate the process and saying it was such a hazard that it needed to be done all at once. However, it appears that the Utah Inland Port Authority doesn't even believe their own words. They don't believe themselves. They are set to follow a phased process that would have been done without their interference and using funds from taxes, which there was absolutely no need for the Utah Inland Port Authority to get involved, especially since they lack the experience to remediate a landfill. This is just one small example of the recklessness of the Utah Inland Port Authority. The project's plans for all of these Port Authority project areas appear on a cursory glance to be well-researched and very thorough. But once you actually review them, you find that they essentially don't answer any important questions, especially concerning the actual economic viability of these sites and the negative consequences to anyone within proximity of these areas. I have not seen any reasonable proof of the necessity of a state authority being involved in funding private development. And I'll say what I've said before, you can't drink warehouses. So, thank you.
Thanks, Teri. Our last speaker is Dr. James Westwater from Spanish Fork. He's with Utah Valley Earth Forum also.
Thank you. Hello, I'm James Westwater, a 20-year resident of Spanish Fork. I'm opposed to the inland port in Spanish Fork for many reasons. Reasons that may also apply to other inland port projects elsewhere in Utah. Here are my reasons for opposing the port in Spanish Fork. In essence, it is a harmful, unneeded, unjustified, bad idea. It's harmful to public health and will increase air pollution-related illnesses and deaths. It's harmful to environmental health, including state-designated wetlands. It's harmful to agricultural interests. It's harmful to the traditional, easygoing, quasi-rural character of the city. It's a waste of taxpayer money, giving public money to private developers. It will increase diesel truck traffic, noise and light pollution, and traffic congestion. It was not justified by any thorough, rigorous, science-based, independent study. No significant effort was made by the city to inform the public of Spanish Fork and obtain their approval. The city manager of Spanish Fork told me the city did not know what specific developments were planned for the inland port and that no study was required, needed, or done. I'm not alone in opposing inland port projects, according to Dr. Sam Rushforth, Emeritus Dean of the Utah Valley University College of Science. Quote, "Leaders in Utah government have a history of ignoring the will of the people they serve. Many of these same officials also seem to be unaware or unconcerned about Utah's fragile environment. A case in point is the proliferation of proposed inland port facilities. These inland ports will substantially increase air pollution, which has greater impact on human health than previously known. Several of these proposed ports also disregard the health of our water and wetlands. Inland ports are a terribly bad idea that will diminish Utah's famous quality of life." Close quote. Furthermore, BYU environmental science professor Dr. Ben Abbott told me the inland port project in Spanish Fork is, quote, "a solution in search of a problem. It's a bad idea," close quote. In conclusion, I think the Utah Inland Port Authority is detrimental to Utah and should be dissolved. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, everyone, that wraps it up, but just wait a second because I want to explain what we're going to do next.